The wind dies down as Ethan steps into the sprawling, desolate fields of the Devereux farm. A suffocating silence wraps around him, thick and unnatural, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. The air is thick with the pungent scent of decay, mingling with an unsettling metallic undertone. Rows of withered crops line his path, the once lush greenery now nothing but brittle stalks, reaching out like skeletal hands from the soil. Every step Ethan takes seems to echo in the stillness, a sharp contrast to the whispers of townsfolk who had warned him to stay away. Yet, he feels an inexplicable pull, a compulsion that won't let him turn back. As he moves deeper into the field, a chill crawls up his spine. Shadows cling to the edges of his vision, just outside his line of sight, slipping away the moment he tries to catch a better look. He brushes it off his nerves, but there's an undeniable weight pressing down on him, something heavy and malicious lingering in the very air he breathes. Ethan catches a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic thump, almost like footsteps, but they're oddly hollow, as if coming from beneath the ground. He stops, listening intently, and for a moment, silence envelopes him again. Then, there's the faintest whisper, like the rustling of dead leaves, but forming words that send a shiver through his soul. It sounds like his name. Ethan's throat tightens, his heart beating faster as he peers into the shadowy expanse of the farm. The fog seems to thicken, crawling across the ground in ghostly tendrils, winding around his feet as if to hold him in place. His hand instinctively moves to the flashlight strapped to his side, but he hesitates. Part of him doesn't want to break the darkness, as if the light might reveal something he's better off not seeing. He feels a faint tickle against his ear, like a cold breath, followed by a distant whisper, too faint to make out, but chilling enough to raise the hairs on his arms. The longer he stands there, the more he's certain. Something is watching him, something that has waited a long time for him to arrive. Just then, Ethan spots a silhouette in the distance. It's faint, barely more than a dark smudge against the night, yet it exudes a malevolent presence that roots him in place. The figure appears to be bending over, working the fields in slow, deliberate movements. But it's strange. The way it moves feels wrong, almost mechanical, like a puppet on strings. Ethan's breath catches as he realizes that there are more shapes emerging from the fog, silent and spectral, each one hunched over, hands moving in eerie synchronization, mimicking the actions of harvesting. They work tirelessly, oblivious to his presence. Yet the longer he watches, the stronger the feeling grows that these figures are aware of him, that they're performing this ghastly routine for his benefit, a silent invitation to join them. The sensation of being watched intensifies, and Ethan feels his skin crawl. A dark, oppressive force fills the air, making it hard to breathe, as though the weight of centuries of suffering has settled upon his shoulders. He tries to look away from the figures, but something won't let him. His gaze is drawn back to them, as if under a spell. The rhythmic thumping continues, growing louder, reverberating through his chest, and he realizes it's not just the sound of ghostly footsteps. It's a heartbeat, but not his own. The farm itself seems alive, pulsating with a dark energy that coils around him, seeping into his mind, whispering secrets too terrible to understand. Ethan takes a shaky step back, only to feel the ground shift beneath him, as though the land itself resists his retreat, urging him deeper into its haunted embrace. As Ethan stands frozen amidst the ominous fog and shadowy silhouettes, a sudden flash of memory jolts him. He recalls, with spine-chilling clarity, his grandmother's voice telling stories of the Devereux farm, whispered warnings of a final harvest cursed to repeat itself on stormy nights. She'd once said, with a far-off look in her eyes, that those fields held memories too dark to be spoken aloud, memories of souls who had never left. He'd laughed it off then, but now the weight of her words feels disturbingly real, hanging in the air like a noose tightening around his neck. Ethan's breath catches as his eyes fall upon something half buried in the dirt near his feet, a small, weathered doll. Its once bright colors are now faded and stained, and the glassy eyes seem to stare up at him, lifeless but somehow aware. A terrifying realization settles over him. This doll isn't just any toy. It's the same one he'd lost as a child, a cherished memory from years past that vanished without explanation. How did it end up here, in the middle of this cursed land? His mind races, heart pounding as he struggles to comprehend the impossibility of it. As he bends down to pick it up, a chill surges through him, as if the doll is a conduit to something darker, a bridge connecting him to whatever haunts this land. The fog around him thickens, coiling tighter, and for a split second, he swears he hears a soft, haunting melody floating through the air. The same lullaby his grandmother used to hum when he was a boy, one that always made him feel safe. But here, in this forsaken place, the tune sounds twisted, warped into something sinister. Each note lingers like a taunt, echoing in the silence, tugging at fragments of a memory he can't quite place. It's as if the farm itself is dredging up pieces of his past, bringing them to the surface to unravel his very sense of self. He grips the doll tighter, feeling its fabric disintegrate slightly under his fingers, and as he does, a horrifying image flashes through his mind, of a field drenched in blood, shadowy figures trapped in a perpetual cycle of reaping, their hollow eyes staring right at him, their faces twisted in silent screams. A deep sense of dread overwhelms him as he realizes that this connection to the farm isn't random. There's a reason he was drawn here, a reason why pieces of his childhood seem intertwined with this place's dark history. He recalls a vague, distant memory of standing in a field just like this one as a child, though he couldn't have been older than 6. His grandmother's hand resting protectively on his shoulder, her voice a tremble as she warned him never to return. But now he can't remember why, and the harder he tries, the more the memory slips through his grasp, like sand falling between his fingers. The lullaby grows louder, its haunting refrain filling the night, merging with the whispers of the ghostly harvesters. Ethan stumbles back, the doll slipping from his hand as he clutches his head, the fractured memories colliding, overwhelming his senses. His mind is a battlefield, torn between the present and fragments of a past that feels both his and foreign at once. He feels himself slipping, losing grip on reality, as if the farm is reaching inside him, pulling out pieces of his own soul to weave into its cursed fabric. He tries to pull himself together, but a chilling voice echoes in his mind, one that sounds eerily like his grandmother's but distorted, hollow. "You were meant to come back, Ethan," it whispers, each word a dagger of terror. The harvest is never done. He feels a sickening realization take hold. This farm, this desolate place, is not merely haunted. It's alive, feeding off the souls bound to it. And now, it's hungry for him. Ethan stumbles forward, his mind swirling with fear and confusion, as the eerie lullaby fades back into the fog. The weight of his surroundings presses down on him, thick with a malevolence that feels both ancient and personal. Just as he begins to consider turning back, he finds himself facing a choice so twisted, so impossible, that he feels his very sanity start to crack. Before him stands a spectral figure, shadowy yet defined, holding out 2 items, each one radiating a dark power that claws at Ethan's soul. The figure's face is obscured, but Ethan senses a familiarity, as though he's seen this being in his nightmares or glimpsed it from the corner of his eye throughout his life. The air grows colder, and he realizes that whatever this entity is, it's here to force his hand in a choice that feels like a cruel game orchestrated by the farm itself. The first item offered is a locket, old and rusted, but unmistakably his grandmother's, the same one she'd worn every day until her death. A sense of warmth and safety emanates from it, pulling him in with memories of her kind eyes and reassuring smile. But as he reaches for it, he's struck by a horrifying thought. Taking the locket would mean surrendering his most cherished memories of her, wiping her from his mind to appease the farm's dark hunger. Could he truly erase his grandmother's legacy, his last connection to a woman who had shielded him from this place and its horrors? Yet he knows, deep down, that doing so might be the only way to pacify the entity, to end the relentless pull of the past trying to consume him. The second item is a shard of darkened glass, smooth and cold, with an oily sheen that shifts in the moonlight. As he stares into it, he feels it tugging at him, drawing out fragments of his very essence. It's not just a reflection. It's a piece of his soul, splintered and waiting for him to claim it. The entity's silent demand becomes clear. To escape, he must sacrifice part of himself, absorbing the darkness of the farm into his own being. But the cost is unbearable. Taking the shard would forever bind him to this land, tethering him to the cursed soil that hungers for lives to sustain itself. He would escape physically, but something inside him would always belong here, a living part of this spectral harvest. His heart races as he weighs these impossible choices. If he takes the locket, he'll lose the most precious parts of his past, erasing the only warmth he's ever known. But taking the shard would mean living with a darkness he could never shake, a taint that would follow him, haunt him, even in the safety of daylight. As he stands there, paralyzed by terror and indecision, he hears the distant echoes of the harvester's whispers growing louder, as if they, too, are waiting for his decision. The fog around him thickens, pressing closer, and he realizes the entity's patience is waning. He can feel its cold gaze piercing through him, a hunger that threatens to consume him whole should he hesitate any longer. In a final, desperate moment, Ethan reaches for the locket, his fingers trembling as he grasps it, feeling its comforting weight in his palm. But as he does, a sharp pain sears through his mind, a tearing sensation that rips at the core of his memories. The fog swirls violently, and the air fills with whispers of loss and regret. A vision strikes him, images of his grandmother, once vivid, now slipping from his memory like a fading photograph. Her face blurs, her voice grows faint, and he realizes with horror that he's losing her entirely, piece by piece. A cold emptiness fills him as the sacrifice takes hold, binding him to the farm's curse in a way that no physical chains ever could. The spectral figure fades into the mist, leaving him alone, hollow, a stranger to his own past. The field around him grows darker, the whispers growing softer until they're barely audible, but their meaning is clear. He has appeased the farm, but at an unimaginable cost. He stumbles back, feeling the weight of the emptiness he now carries, and wonders if he has truly escaped, or if he's now as much a part of this haunted land as the harvesters who toil under the moon's sinister gaze. As Ethan clutches the fading warmth of the locket, the world around him seems to shift. The air thickens, pressing in on him as though the fog itself has become a living, breathing entity. Shadows bleed from the edges of his vision, seeping into the ground, coiling around the withered crops, and twisting them into grotesque, human-like figures. They sway gently, like macabre dancers under a spell, their movements synchronized with a rhythm he can't hear but feels in his bones. Each step he takes echoes back at him, and soon he realizes he's not walking alone. Something in the shadows is matching his pace, a soft padding sound behind him, close enough that he feels its breath grazing his neck. But every time he turns, there's nothing, only the silent, endless rows of twisted crops. A cold sweat breaks over him as his flashlight flickers, casting erratic beams that make the shadows stretch and shrink in disturbing ways. Out of the corner of his eye, he catches glimpses of figures moving just beyond the light's reach, spectral shapes hovering at the edge of the fog, watching him with hollow, unblinking eyes. Their faces are obscured, but their presence is unmistakable. They are the harvesters, bound to this cursed land, endlessly reaping an invisible crop under the watch of a malevolent force. The closer he looks, the more he sees that their faces are twisted in expressions of agony, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror as they work. Ethan's chest tightens as he realizes that these aren't mere apparitions. They are trapped souls, forced to repeat this harvest in a cruel mockery of life, with no hope of escape. Suddenly, a soft whisper fills the air, snaking through the fog and wrapping around him like a vice. It's indistinct at first, like a breeze through dry leaves, but soon he begins to make out words, faint but unmistakable. Join us. It's your time. The voices murmur, overlapping, a chorus of despair. Ethan's pulse races as he spins around, searching for the source. But the fog thickens, swallowing up his surroundings until he's left standing in a shrouded, claustrophobic cocoon of gray. The whispers grow louder, more insistent, filling his mind with half-formed thoughts that aren't his own, memories of lives he's never lived, faces he's never seen. It's as if the farm itself is attempting to graft its cursed history onto his soul, making him one of its own. Then, as if summoned by his growing fear, the shadows around him begin to pulse, taking on a life of their own. He watches in horror as the figures in the fog start to materialize, gaining substance, their forms sharpening into distinct, horrifying shapes. A face emerges just inches from his own, pale and hollow-eyed, staring at him with a lifeless, accusing gaze. Its mouth opens, but no sound escapes, only an oppressive silence that crushes him from the inside. He stumbles back, heart pounding, but everywhere he turns, another figure emerges, each one reaching out with twisted, claw-like fingers, dragging themselves closer with each rasping breath, as if drawn to the warmth of his life. Ethan's mind reels as the figures close in, their eyes fixed on him, hollow yet filled with a silent, all-consuming hunger. The whispers shift to hissing, venomous tones, each voice dripping with resentment and rage. "You took our place," they murmur. "You belong here, just as we do." Their words cut through him, leaving a chilling realization in their wake. The choice he made has marked him as one of them. He feels a strange pull, an inexplicable urge to join the spectral figures, to walk among them and reap the invisible crop under the endless night. His limbs feel heavy, his mind foggy, as if something is seducing him, binding him deeper to the cursed land. Just as his mind begins to slip, he catches a final glimpse of his grandmother's face, faint but defiant, a memory fighting to break free from the fog. Her voice echoes faintly in his mind, urging him to resist, to remember who he is. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he shakes himself from the trance, breaking the gaze of the nearest harvester. The figures pause, their forms wavering as if disturbed by his defiance. But the silence deepens, and Ethan realizes with dread that they are waiting, watching to see if he will falter again. As he stands there, the whispers grow softer, fading into a taunting lull, leaving Ethan alone, but with the terrible knowledge that they are not gone, they are simply waiting. Ethan stumbles forward, his mind reeling from the whispers and visions that clung to him like a curse. Every inch of his surroundings seems warped, alive in ways he cannot explain, as though the farm has twisted itself into a labyrinth of his deepest fears. Shadows no longer sit passively on the edges of his vision. They pulse and throb, moving with a silent, predatory intent, shifting every time he dares to blink. Each step feels like sinking into a waking nightmare, and he's no longer sure if he's in the real world or trapped in a dark hallucination brought on by whatever malevolent force governs this cursed land. The field around him morphs, becoming both familiar and foreign, and he realizes with a jolt that the longer he stays, the more the farm pulls him into its dark heart, merging his memories with its nightmarish reality. Suddenly, flashes of his own fears flood his mind, twisting into vivid, unsettling hallucinations that make him question every sight and sound. He sees the face of his grandmother, her gentle smile distorted, her eyes hollow and lifeless, mouthing words he cannot hear but instinctively fears. It's a sight that stirs something primal within him, a terror that roots him to the spot, as though his body is rejecting the horror yet drawn to it, helpless against its pull. As he tries to steady himself, he hears faint laughter, a child's giggle, eerily out of place. The sound grows louder, echoing around him, and he catches a glimpse of a small figure darting between the dead crops. It's a boy, thin and pale, his clothes old-fashioned and tattered, his face concealed beneath shadows. The child's laughter echoes, cold and hollow, a mockery of innocence twisted by something dark. Ethan wants to look away, but his feet carry him forward, deeper into the mists, as if driven by a force beyond his control. The boy stops and turns, and Ethan's breath catches as he realizes the child's face is his own, a reflection of himself as a young boy, staring back at him with eyes that are empty, black voids devoid of life. The vision vanishes in an instant, but Ethan's heart races as he tries to process what he's seen. His own mind, it seems, is turning against him, casting his fears into spectral shapes that blur the line between reality and nightmare. His hands tremble as he moves forward, each step heavy with dread. The familiar fields stretch out before him, but they feel twisted, elongated, as though each row of crops hides a secret waiting to ensnare him. The ground beneath his feet feels alive, shifting with each step, threatening to swallow him whole. Then, without warning, Ethan's vision begins to darken at the edges, a creeping shadow clouding his sight. He blinks, but the darkness grows, and soon he's plunged into a terrifying void, his senses overwhelmed by an oppressive silence. Out of this void, shapes emerge, horrific distortions of people he's known, faces twisted into grotesque smiles, eyes wide and accusing. They float around him, murmuring accusations in voices he half recognizes but can't fully place. The terror intensifies as they close in, whispering doubts, feeding off his growing fear. "You don't belong here," they hiss, each voice layered with the venom of betrayal, resentment, and fear. Ethan's heart pounds as he stumbles, trying to escape the suffocating circle of phantoms. They swirl around him, mocking him with his own fears, his own regrets. He feels his mind fraying, his grip on reality slipping further, and he realizes with horror that the farm is not just an external force. It's digging into his psyche, unearthing his deepest insecurities and using them as weapons against him. A familiar voice echoes among the murmurs, low and sorrowful, and he recognizes it as his grandmother's. "You shouldn't have come back, Ethan," it whispers, filling him with a crushing sense of regret. The words echo, each one heavier than the last, embedding themselves in his mind like nails, driving him to the brink of despair. The terror reaches its peak when the ground beneath him shifts violently, the soil cracking open in jagged lines. From within the cracks, shadowy hands reach out, thin and skeletal, grasping at his ankles with an icy grip. Ethan cries out, but his voice feels swallowed by the darkness, as though the land itself is devouring his very sound. He thrashes, trying to break free, but the hands tighten, pulling him down, inch by inch, as if the farm is claiming him, feeding off his fear and desperation. His heartbeat roars in his ears, his vision blurring as he feels the last threads of his sanity slipping away, drowning in a fear that feels eternal. In a final, desperate act, he shuts his eyes, trying to block out the visions, the voices, the icy grip pulling him down. Summoning every ounce of his will, he forces himself to remember who he is, what brought him here, and fights against the pull of the shadows. Slowly, the hands release him, the whispers fading, leaving him gasping and trembling on the cold, unyielding ground. He opens his eyes to find himself alone once more, the field eerily silent, but the terror lingers, crawling under his skin, reminding him that the farm's horrors have only begun their relentless torment. As Ethan rises, shaken and drained, he feels a shift in the air, colder, heavier, filled with a sinister expectation. The farm is silent, but it's the kind of silence that presses into the soul, a suffocating quiet that hides something dark and dreadful beneath its surface. He knows instinctively that the moment of truth is near, that the answers to the terrifying riddles of this place await him, but he is paralyzed by the realization that facing them may demand more than he can give. He forces himself to move forward, though each step feels weighted, as though the ground itself resists him, thick with shadows that cling to his feet like unseen hands trying to pull him back. As he moves deeper into the field, a figure emerges from the mist, spectral yet disturbingly familiar. It's the patriarch of the Devereux family, or rather, a twisted echo of him. Tall and gaunt, his eyes sunken but gleaming with an unnatural light. His face is etched with a permanent sneer, his skin waxy and pale, hanging loosely over skeletal features. Ethan feels a chill run through his body as the patriarch's gaze settles on him, a gaze that penetrates straight to his soul. There is no life in those eyes, only an insatiable hunger, a darkness that seems to writhe beneath the surface, waiting to consume. The figure raises a bony finger and points directly at Ethan, a silent command that brooks no defiance. Ethan's legs move without his consent, dragging him forward, closer to the ghostly patriarch, closer to the heart of the farm's darkness. His pulse races as he tries to resist, but his body betrays him, bound to the sinister will of this cursed land. The air grows thicker, colder, and he feels the weight of countless souls pressing in around him, invisible yet undeniably present, each one a silent witness to the horror that is about to unfold. A memory strikes him, sharp and unbidden, his grandmother's fearful warnings, her insistence that he never return to this place, that the land itself was cursed, feeding on the lives of those drawn to it. He realizes with a mounting dread that his family is tied to this farm, bound by a curse laid upon it generations ago. The Devereux patriarch's cruel gaze confirms his fear, a smirk playing at the corners of the specter's mouth, as if savoring Ethan's slow descent into despair. The whispers start again, but this time they are clearer, more insistent, echoing the voices of those who came before him, warning him, pleading with him to escape before he too is swallowed by the darkness. The figure speaks at last, his voice a low, guttural rasp that crawls beneath Ethan's skin. Your blood is part of this soil, just like those before you. You have come to take your place among the harvest. The words chill Ethan to the bone, each syllable dripping with a cruel satisfaction, a hunger that has waited decades for him to return. He tries to speak, to protest, but his voice dies in his throat as the figure gestures to the ground at his feet, where shadows begin to swirl, forming images from his past, fragments of memories long buried, twisted and darkened by the farm's malice. He watches, horrified, as scenes from his childhood replay in the shadowy soil, but they are warped, altered, each memory tainted with something dark and unnatural. He sees himself as a child, playing in a field, laughing as his grandmother watches from afar, her face anxious, worried. But in the shadows retelling, her expression shifts, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted into a look of despair as she turns away from him, as if she knew all along that he would end up here, bound to the same cursed fate. Ethan's heart aches, his mind reeling as he confronts the realization that his family had been tied to this place, forced to sacrifice parts of themselves to keep its dark secrets at bay. The ghostly patriarch steps closer, his form flickering in and out of focus, like a candle's flame threatening to extinguish, yet somehow enduring. His face twists into a cruel grin as he leans in, his voice now a whisper that seeps into Ethan's mind, erasing any lingering doubts. You are not just an outsider. You are part of us, bound by blood and bone, by fear and sacrifice. You have a choice, Ethan. Become one with this land, or let the darkness consume every piece of you. As the patriarch's words settle into his mind, Ethan realizes that he is trapped, his soul caught in the web of this cursed place. He can feel the pull, the ancient hunger of the farm wrapping itself around him, urging him to surrender, to take his place among the damned who toil under the night sky, forever bound to a harvest that never ends. His mind is a battlefield of conflicting desires, the desperate need to escape and the terrifying lure of becoming part of the land, to dissolve into the darkness, to let go of everything he is and submit to the farm's will. In a final act of defiance, Ethan closes his eyes, clinging to the last scraps of his humanity, whispering a silent plea to whatever remains of his grandmother's memory, hoping that somehow, some way, she might help him resist. The shadows around him seem to pulse, angry and impatient, but he feels a faint warmth, a flicker of light in the depths of his mind, as though her spirit is fighting alongside him, giving him the strength to resist. With every ounce of will he can muster, he opens his eyes, staring defiantly into the patriarch's empty gaze, a silent declaration that he will not be broken. The figure sneers, fading back into the mist, but Ethan knows the battle is far from over. The farm's grip loosens, yet he can feel its hunger lingering, watching, waiting, as he turns away, staggering back toward the edge of the field. He is no longer the man he was, each step burdened by the weight of what he's seen, what he's felt. But he is free, at least for now, and as he stumbles away, he realizes that the farm is patient, that its curse endures, and that one day it will call him back to finish what he has started. Ethan's retreat feels more like an escape from the jaws of a beast as he staggers through the mist, the weight of the farm's curse pressing down on him with each step. But before he can reach the edge of the property, the ground trembles beneath his feet, and the air shifts, thickening with an icy malevolence. The fog around him swirls, forming a dense barrier that blocks his path, and he knows, with a sinking dread, that he is not yet free. A dark whisper rises from the soil, a voice layered with the echoes of countless souls who have succumbed to the farm's pull, each word laced with a bitter resentment that gnaws at his resolve. He turns, heart pounding, and sees the spectral figure of the Devereux patriarch re-emerging from the mist, his form more solid now, his presence radiating an overwhelming aura of authority and cruelty. The patriarch's eyes, empty and merciless, fixate on Ethan, a silent command that roots him to the spot. Ethan's body tenses as he realizes that he has reached the final confrontation, the last battle between him and this cursed land, and that his only choices are submission or a fight that will test the limits of his soul. With a flick of the patriarch's wrist, the earth beneath Ethan begins to writhe, cracking open in jagged fissures that reveal tendrils of shadow rising from the depths, coiling and twisting like living chains. They reach for him, tendrils cold as death wrapping around his ankles, his wrists, pulling him down with a strength that defies any earthly force. He struggles, gasping, but the shadows tighten, binding him to the ground, anchoring him as if to absorb him into the land itself. Panic surges through him, and he realizes with horror that the farm is trying to claim him, to turn him into one of the spectral harvesters doomed to toil in the fields for eternity. As the shadows pull him further, his mind flashes with images of the cursed workers, their hollow eyes and faces twisted in silent agony. He feels their pain as if it were his own, a relentless, soul-crushing despair that seeps into his bones, threatening to extinguish every last spark of his will. The patriarch steps closer, his figure looming over Ethan, his face a mask of satisfaction and contempt. His voice, cold and devoid of empathy, cuts through the darkness. "You could have walked away," he sneers, his words a dagger to Ethan's heart. "But now, you are bound to this place, just as they were. The harvest never ends, Ethan, and tonight, it's your turn." In a desperate bid for freedom, Ethan summons the last vestiges of his strength, thrashing against the tendrils of darkness that pull him deeper into the cursed soil. His mind races, searching for anything that might break the farm's hold on him. And then a memory surfaces, faint but powerful. He recalls his grandmother's voice, her hands clutching his as she whispered words of protection, an old family prayer meant to guard against the darkness. With his voice trembling, he begins to recite the prayer, the words coming out in halting, desperate gasps. At first, the shadows tighten, as if trying to strangle the words from his lips. But with each phrase, he feels a flicker of warmth, a defiant light that pushes back against the encroaching darkness. The patriarch's sneer falters, his form flickering as if struggling to maintain its hold. The tendrils around Ethan's limbs begin to waver, loosening their grip as the ancient words drive them back. The ground beneath him trembles with fury, the very soil rejecting his resistance, but Ethan's determination strengthens, fueled by the memory of his grandmother and the life he refuses to surrender. With a final, powerful shout, he completes the prayer, and the shadows recoil, retreating into the cracks of the earth with anguished wails. The patriarch's form shudders, his expression twisting into one of rage and fear, his hold over the land faltering under the weight of the protective words. Ethan rises to his feet, his body trembling, but his spirit unbroken. The The spectral figure of the patriarch stares at him, hollow eyes burning with a hatred that could shatter stone. But for the first time, Ethan sees a flicker of something else in the ghost's gaze: defeat. As the mist begins to dissipate, the patriarch raises a trembling, skeletal finger, pointing it at Ethan, his voice a venomous hiss that lingers in the air like a curse. You may have escaped tonight, but the farm is patient. It will wait for you, and one day, you will return. With those final, chilling words, the patriarch's form dissolves into the fog, his essence retreating into the shadows, merging once more with the haunted soil. The oppressive silence lifts, and the night air feels almost breathable again. Yet Ethan knows that the threat has merely subsided, not vanished. The farm remains waiting, its hunger temporarily sated, but ever vigilant, watching for his inevitable return. Ethan stumbles away from the field, his body and mind battered, but his soul intact. He knows he's escaped by the narrowest margin, but as he reaches the edge of the property, he stops and turns, compelled to look back one last time. The mist hangs low over the fields, thick and unmoving, but in the distance, he swears he sees shapes moving, silent, spectral figures continuing their endless, cursed harvest under the watchful eye of the farm. The whispers return, faint and distant, a reminder that his escape is only temporary, that he is bound to this place by blood and fate. The image of the patriarch's hollow eyes and the twisted faces of the harvesters will haunt him for the rest of his life, a chilling reminder of the price that nearly claimed him. And as he steps away from the property, he feels a lingering coldness in his chest, a seed of darkness planted by the farm, a reminder of its promise to call him back one day. Ethan knows he's living on borrowed time, that the farm's hunger will return, insatiable and relentless. But for tonight, he is free, though he can never truly leave the darkness behind. Ethan leaves the cursed fields behind him, the chill of the night pressing into his skin, as if the farm's sinister touch still lingers, clinging to him like a shadow. His breath comes in short, ragged bursts as he stumbles down the dirt path, feeling every aching step pull him further from that place of torment. Yet a gnawing sense of dread remains, burrowed deep in his bones, a feeling that whispers that he has not truly escaped. As he glances over his shoulder, he catches one last glimpse of the Devereux farm bathed moonlight, its fields stretching endlessly, ghostly figures laboring under the night's unyielding watch. The mist shrouds their forms, but he can still see their twisted faces, their hollow eyes staring back at him, as if to remind him that the farm's grasp is far from over. He reaches the edge of town just as the first light of dawn breaks over the horizon, casting a pale glow that feels cold and unwelcome after the horrors of the night. His mind swirls with images of the harvesters, the patriarch's spectral gaze, and the oppressive fog that nearly swallowed him whole. Exhausted, he finds himself at his grandmother's grave, drawn to it as though it holds the answers to the darkness he's experienced. He kneels, placing his trembling hand on the cold, unyielding stone, hoping for some semblance of peace, some reassurance that he is finally free from the farm's curse. But as the early morning light seeps into the sky, casting long shadows over the grave, he notices something that chills him to the core. Resting against the base of the tombstone is the locket, the same one he had sacrificed in the hopes of appeasing the farm's dark hunger. He picks it up with shaking hands, the metal cold and somehow heavier, as though it has absorbed the weight of the farm's ancient curse. As he holds it, a flicker of memory returns, a fleeting image of his grandmother's face, but it's distorted, hollow, her once kind eyes empty and sorrowful. The memory vanishes as quickly as it came, leaving him with an agonizing emptiness, a reminder of the piece of his past that he sacrificed and can never reclaim. Haunted, he pockets the locket, feeling its weight press against him like an invisible chain. Even as he leaves the cemetery, the quiet murmur of whispers fills his ears, faint and distant, as if they're calling to him from somewhere far away, or perhaps from within himself. Days pass, but he finds no solace. Shadows linger in the corners of his vision, and every whisper of wind through the trees feels like the murmurs of the harvesters. He begins to sense the farm in his daily life, glimpsing faint specters in reflections, catching the scent of decaying earth even in his own home. It's as if a part of the farm has followed him, embedding itself in his soul, waiting, patient. One night, as he's lying in bed, sleep eluding him, he hears it, a soft, rhythmic thumping from outside his window, like the distant sound of tools striking soil. His heart races as he pulls back the curtains, his breath catching at the sight of shadowy figures moving in his yard, their forms distorted by the dim moonlight. He blinks, and they're gone, but the fear remains, coiling tighter around his chest. He knows what he saw, even if his mind tries to reject it. The farm has found a way to follow him, its curse seeping into his world, spreading its roots into the foundation of his life. The next morning, he finds dirt scattered across his doorstep and the faint outline of footprints, as though someone or something had been standing there waiting. He feels an eerie familiarity, as if he's walking the line between two worlds, haunted by both memory and reality. Friends begin to notice his haggard appearance, the dark circles under his eyes, his jumpy demeanor. But he can't tell them the truth. He knows they'd never believe the horrors he's endured. The curse is his alone to bear, a weight that presses deeper into his mind with each passing day. As the weeks turn into months, Ethan's grip on reality frays. He dreams of the harvesters, their faces twisted in eternal agony, reaching out to him, begging him to join them, to take his rightful place among the fields. He wakes up drenched in sweat, only to find traces of dirt under his nails, the scent of rotting earth lingering in his room. The line between dreams and waking life blurs, until he no longer knows which realm he truly belongs to. The whispers become louder, constant, a maddening lullaby that never ceases, reminding him that the farm is patient, that it can wait forever if it must. One evening, he receives a letter with no return address. Inside is a single slip of paper, scrawled with a message that chills him to his core. The harvest awaits. His hands shake as he reads it, the words echoing in his mind like a death sentence. He tries to ignore it, but the message haunts him, seeping into his thoughts until it's all he can hear. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the fields, the harvesters, the patriarch's hollow gaze, waiting for him to return. In his final moments of sanity, he understands the terrible truth. The farm was never just a place. It was a hunger, a curse woven into his very blood, waiting to be fed. And he realizes with a creeping horror that he cannot escape it. It will draw him back, one way or another, and when it does, he will become one with the harvest, just as those before him. Ethan packs a small bag, his movements mechanical, numb. He doesn't tell anyone where he's going. There's no point. He knows the farm will reclaim him, and that its curse will continue, stretching across generations, waiting for the next soul to stumble into its grasp. As he steps onto the path leading back to the Devereux farm, the whispers grow louder, welcoming him, pulling him into their fold. The mist thickens around him, the shadows deepening as the farm opens its arms to embrace its newest harvester. And as he crosses into the fields, he feels the final vestiges of his humanity slipping away, consumed by the ancient hunger of the land. The harvest has no end, and Ethan's soul, bound to the soil, will toil under the eternal night, just another face among the ghostly figures, forever lost in the cursed fields of the Devereux farm.